Hi guys, it's Christy again. Last week, the editor of War Games Soldiers and Strategy came to visit us for a little bit, and he brought with him a whole bunch of new figures that I could paint for this channel, and that was a mix of things that I'd requested because I thought they'd be fun, and also stuff that people have been asking me to do for a while. So that's nice because it means I've got a nice big stock of models I can use for upcoming tutorials. Now, to kick things off, I thought I would start out by painting this guy. He is a World War II GI figure in a greatcoat. He is by Warlord Games, and I have painted normal US World War II soldiers, but somebody asked me, it's been a while ago now, I think, how to paint Americans when they're in winter gear. So this is the kind of model that's suitable for, say, you know, the Battle of the Bulge, Bastogne, that kind of thing. And, you know, even if you don't have a specifically sort of winter-themed collection, I think a model like this could really probably fit well into a lot of American forces, and it's kind of a good way just to add a little bit of variety to your models.
To begin with, here are all the paints you're going to need to complete this model. As usual, the paints for the face and skin are not included here. I'm going to start off by working on the soldier's uniform right now because it's sort of below the greatcoat. It's easier to paint it first. So I'm going to do the pants, and I'm base coating them here with Vallejo German camouflage medium brown. I'm going to darken them then further with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. While that wash is having a chance to dry, I'm going to apply base coat to his uniform jacket. I'm base coating this right now using German camouflage pale brown. I'm going to work on highlighting the pants now real quick. Not too much is showing here, so you should be able to finish this pretty quickly. What I've done is taken some Vallejo brown sand and used it to lighten a little bit the German camouflage medium brown, and I'm going to apply sort of a careful highlight. And it's pretty easy to see where you should highlight because the jacket really shows what's in shadow and what's not. And then I'm going to just lighten it even further with more of the brown sand to get a little bit higher highlight. And then just finish off with some pure brown sand, which is applied then in the highest, brightest areas very transparently. I'm then going to highlight the uniform jacket. In order to do that, I'm taking the German camouflage pale brown and I'm using Iraqi sand to gradually lighten it. So I start out first with just a little bit of Iraqi sand in my mix, so I get sort of a very subtle highlight, and then I'm going to build up from that, adding a couple layers. And it's a fairly transparent paint that you're getting, so you'll probably want to apply several coats of sort of each color of paint. I then kind of finished off on the end after applying 2 or 3 different sort of levels of that, just using some pure Iraqi sand to get a really bright highlight sort of on the edges of the collar and the pockets and seams and that kind of thing. Now I'm going to move on to the greatcoat, which is kind of the most important part of this whole figure. Again, I'm using the German camouflage medium brown as my base coat here. And because we're working over black, you'll probably find you have to go back in and apply a couple of coats just to get enough coverage. And then because I want to build up a little bit more contrast, I'm going to apply a nice heavy wash, again, of Agrax Earthshade all over the coat so that it really gets down in any sort of seams or folds in the fabric. Now I'm going to start highlighting, and I really spent quite a bit of time on this. My first highlight layer that I used I took the German camouflage medium brown again, and I mixed in a little bit of Vallejo English uniform into that. And what I also added into it was a bit of Russian uniform, World War II, which is kind of a greeny brown color, I guess. If you look at these great coats that the Americans wore, they're sort of really brown, but I guess for me at least, they have sort of a slight greenish tone to them. So my first highlight is just sort of a mixture of all these colors. And after this first layer that I'm applying, I'm not going to put any more English uniform into it. I decided it's a little bit too yellow, but I am going to keep using that Russian uniform color. And you can see this first layer is pretty subtle over the base. You can see it's mostly changing the tone. It's really not making it a whole lot lighter. For my next step, I continued kind of doing what I was. You can see again, this is a very subtle difference from my last tone. I basically just added more of the Russian uniform World War II into that color I already had. So that causes it to get a bit lighter and a little bit greener, as you can see. But it's very subtle. But again, all these layers that I'm putting on here and keeping them subtle like this is going to be nice, because it'll mean you won't have to do nearly so much blending, but you'll get a good sort of very varied, subtle end result. And then for my next layer, I added even more of the Russian uniform, but I also started lightening the color in a sort of a more extreme way by mixing in a very small amount of Iraqi sand. And I'm keeping it real subtle here because I don't want it to get too light or too pale too quickly. It's just a teeny tiny amount, enough to slightly lighten the color. And so you can see I can sort of gradually continue creating that blended effect without actually having to do too much blending on the figure. And at this point, I'm really starting to focus on areas where light is hitting, like along the top of his collar and the tops of his sleeves. And of course, I always like to apply a lot around the sort of the bottom edges of the cloak, coat, I guess, I'm sorry, because it tends to fade there, and it just looks better when those areas are a little bit lighter. At this point, I started doing more edge highlighting work. So this color has a fair amount of Iraqi sand, and it's still pretty subtle, but you can see I'm really now using this color really sort of along the edges of the sleeves and the coat, and sort of anywhere there's sort of seams or belts or anything like that. And the lines I'm creating here are fairly broad, so it's sort of a rough edge highlight, I guess. And you can see kind of the reason I'm doing that is because it's still a pretty subtle sort of color step from the last one, so I don't really need to worry about being very thin and precise with my brush work here. Now I'm putting on my final edge highlight, and this has a substantial amount of Iraqi sand in it, so it's quite a bit lighter than the rest of the coat. So I have to apply it pretty carefully so it doesn't make things too light. So I have it real thin here, the paint, and I'm applying a really sort of transparent, very careful, thin line. You see, I even wipe it off sometimes if I make a little bit of a mess. And I'm just really using it to edge very carefully all the sort of separate components of the coat, and I'm using it to emphasize any sort of sharp folds or wrinkles along the top with very thin lines. But you can see I'm not really blending this very much or anything, or sort of overusing it in large areas because it's just too light a color for that. But sort of using it to add this extra definition really helps make the sort of finished coat sort of pop, and gives it that extra little bit of highlighting that just makes it look good. Now, because this is a winter uniform, our lieutenant here has some gloves on, and he's got kind of a scarf wrapped around his neck and around his head for extra warmth. These came in different colors. I decided to go with sort of a green olive drab version, which you see sometimes because that's a nice complementary color, but it adds some variety to the model. So I'm using German camouflage dark green to base coat these areas. In order to highlight the scarf and gloves, I mixed in again that Russian uniform World War II into the dark green, and I applied that sort of as a first highlight shade. And then I moved right on up to just pure Russian uniform by itself, and I used that to further sort of define the fingers and the sort of the folds in his scarf and those sorts of areas. Because there are a lot of sharp folds and you've got fingers in the gloves and you really want some high contrast, I wanted to lighten everything further. So I took some Vallejo Sky Gray and I mixed it in to the color I was already using. And you can see I'm putting that really on areas where I want some real sharp contrast. And I'm mostly really only applying this as sort of really fine, thin lines to really just add that extra definition. Now for the boots, and I'm base coating these again with the German Camouflage medium brown, and don't worry, I'm going to kind of change it up after this. Most American boots during World War II had kind of this reddish leather that was used in them, so I've mixed some saddle brown now into the German Camouflage medium brown, and I'm applying that as a first highlight. My next highlight then is just pure saddle brown. You want to be careful because this is a real intense color and it'll really redden the area pretty substantially, so you know, apply it in sort of thin layers. Then, because I wanted to get a bit more contrast and just highlight the boots more, I mixed a little bit of Iraqi sand into the saddle brown. So you get kind of a pale pinky brown color, and you can see I'm using that to define around the edges of the leather areas and the sort of straps or ties or whatever a little bit. I actually went back in after I applied the highlights and took the sort of the original dark base color and sort of darkened some areas down a little bit because I also didn't want them to get too kind of faded out looking. I then quickly added an Agrax Earthshade wash once I was done to just kind of help unify those different tones in the boots. Now, normally these military boots would just have all been leather, but sometimes they kind of made these waterproof variants that sort of had rubber bottoms to them, and that's pretty clearly what's going on here. I guess it makes sense in winter to wear them like that. So I'm just base coating the bottom of the boots using German gray. I'm also going to use the German gray to put a base coat on his binoculars while I'm at it. I'm then just going to take a little bit of the sky gray I already had. I'm going to sort of lighten my German gray and create a couple of highlights, which I'm going to use on both the boots and on the binoculars. And I'm going to keep it pretty subtle just for the sort of the first couple of steps. Especially on the binoculars, I'm not going to make them too light. But you can see on the boots, I'm going to go a little bit lighter with my gray and sort of put an edge highlight along the sort of divide between the leather and the rubber, and especially on the toes. And there's also sort of these little rubber ridges on the toes of those boots. So I'm going to use some just pure sky gray to actually just really emphasize those and actually kind of make them look a little bit shiny, because you know how rubber can get shiny looking and a little reflective. Now I'm going to use German Camouflage Black Brown to base coat the leather strap on his rifle and also on the wooden stock of the gun. I'm going to apply a first highlight to both the strap and the stock of the gun simultaneously using the German Camouflage Medium Brown again. For the stock, I'm going to mix a little bit of the English uniform in it to give it a kind of yellowish cast to highlight it further, and then but on the strap I'm going to mix in some of the saddle brown and apply it to give it a reddish cast there. I'm going to continue highlighting the stock using just pure English uniform, but keeping it really, really thin. And the strap I'm then going to also highlight a little further, first with a bit of pure red brown, or saddle brown, sorry, and then I'm going to mix in a little bit of Iraqi sand to put some really light faded effects here and there on the strap. Now this M1 Garand that he's carrying is really known for having a little ammo pouch attached to the base of it. At least it was frequently. I'm base coating the ammo pouch here using some brown sand. And I'm not going to work on that little paper he has folded in his pocket, so I'm base coating that with some Iraqi sand. I'm then going to go back and work on highlighting the ammo pouch by mixing some of the Iraqi sand into the brown sand as a first highlight. And then once that's on there, I'm going to go ahead and apply pure Iraqi sand to it to add sort of a higher highlight, so you get kind of a khaki looking pouch, which is the color that these usually were. As for his paper, I'm going to grab some just pure white, and I'm going to use that to finish highlighting the paper. And I'm also going to mix a little of Iraqi sand and white too, just so I can add some extra sort of high edge highlights to the ammo pouch. Now for his helmet, which has a cloth cover on it, and because he's in a winter sort of environment, these covers, they just use like white fabric for them. I'm just taking some sky gray here and applying a base coat to the helmet. You're going to need several coats because you're working over black. I'm then going to start highlighting the helmet with a mixture of white and sky gray, and you can see I'm really starting to try to pick out where I see sort of folds or creases in the fabric, because you really want to get a little bit of contrast there since it's otherwise so white, and you need to get some kind of definition in there. And then, like what I do when I'm always painting white, I'm just going to take white paint here and just start building it up on top of the helmet in multiple layers until I'm happy with the sort of intensity. So yeah, I'm just painting the sort of folds and creases and then building up multiple layers. And this takes a little bit of time. You need to be a little bit patient. You want your white to look nice and even. And I'm sorry I can't really show you the process a little better, but it's very, very difficult for me to paint sort of the area on the top of a figure's head like this accurately and still show it on camera while I'm doing it. Now for the metal parts on his rifle, I'm just taking some German gray here and applying a base coat to those metal areas. And then I'm just going to mix a bit of Vallejo Air gunmetal into my German gray and sort of apply a first highlight to the metal. And then I'm going to just finish, as always, by taking pure gunmetal and just very lightly touching it to areas where I know there's going to be extra wear and tear, like the bolt action and sort of along the top, and, you know, just wherever you want there to be a little bit of extra shine. Now I made a little bit of a mess here, which I had to clean up later, which is why you'll see me putting water everywhere in a minute. But I need to paint brass buttons on his coat, which I did with a base coat of German camouflage black-brown mixed with Vallejo Air gold. And then I just highlighted using Vallejo Air pure gold. But again, with that metallic paint, even at this stage, it can really make a mess if you get any of it on anywhere else, and you really use water to flush it off so you don't end up with a sparkly coat. Okay, so here is our finished World War II American lieutenant for sort of a winter campaign like the Battle of the Bulge. This figure didn't really take very long to paint at all. It's, again, very simple, but I think it has very, very nice results on it. It's all these nice neutral colors. Sometimes it's a simple scheme, but it still just looks very, very nice when you've got all that sort of unity. And then just a few areas to draw the eye, like his white helmet cover, for example, or that piece of paper he has folded in his pocket. I think this is supposed to be an officer, pretty obviously. He actually should probably have insignia on his collar. I didn't go ahead and paint that here, but that would not be a big deal. You could just dab a little bit of metal paint on there and call it a day, or you can just kind of leave it off and not worry about it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, please like it, share it, leave me comments with what you thought, and do subscribe to my channel, of course, if you haven't gotten a chance to do so already. So that's all for now, and I will see you next time.